Good evening and welcome to the first meeting of fiscal year 2025 for the Milton Planning Board. At this time, I would like to now call the meeting to order and begin with introductions of the planning board members and staff. Would you like to begin?
Sure. Cheryl Tagayas, Secretary.
Maggie Oldfield, member.
Jim Davis, member.
And this evening on Zoom, we have Sean Fahey. Sean?
Sean Fahey, member.
Yes, Sean, there he is. And now to introduce our staff, I don't know if you're on mute, Sean, but we can see you.
Okay.
Now to introduce Tim and our staff.
Tim Zerwinski, Director of Planning and Community Development.
Cheyenne.
Diane Frazier, Assistant Director of Planning and Community Development.
Great. And with us in person is Julia. Julia Gavin. Great. Thank you and welcome to all. Now that we've called the meeting to order, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes, and we have 3 sets. Thank you, Cheryl. You've been diligently working on those. From May 23rd, June 10th, and June 27th. Has everyone had an opportunity to look those over?
I have.
So unless I'm missing, I'm looking at an old copy. On the 27th, it just says that the 95 Dexter Street had been reviewed, blah, blah, blah. And then it was noted that the land abuts town of Canton, which could also be required to grant A&R approval. I think it's just a carryover from the last minutes.
So I struck that last sentence.
Yeah.
Oh, did you? Good.
Yes, and then just a couple other minor changes.
Okay.
Right, in
Yep.
those minutes.
Okay, great then. I'm all set with all 3.
Okay.
Okay. If so, can I have a motion to approve the minutes? And we'll need a roll call.
I'll move to approve the minutes for May 23rd, June 10th, and June 27th.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Roll call. Cheryl?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Maggie?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank you. Okay. And for upcoming next meeting dates, we have the meeting next Thursday on the 25th, and then we are into August, which is hard to believe. And the next meeting will be scheduled for the 8th and the 22nd. Are normally scheduled monthly meetings. And now, Tim, if you want to give, if you have any, as a director, any community development updates.
Yeah, one quick thing, and sort of relative to scheduling for next meetings. I think there had been some interest in meeting with the folks that are behind the proposed redesign of Wharf Park, which is the sort of the green space between the MBTA lot and Milton Landing. There was a group that had received CPC funding last year to do a redesign of that park. It's where the farmers market is, and I think there's a notion that, you know, with a little tender loving care, it can be an even nicer and more useful and effective open space for the town. That group has been having a number of stakeholder meetings with folks in the neighborhood, property owners. They've met with, myself and Nick on a number of occasions, the Select Board Landing Committee. And I think, there had been a request that they check in with the Planning Board. So I wanted to relay that if folks are available on the morning of the 25th, which looks like it is a week from today, that the landscape architect and sort of the leader of the effort, Scott McKay, former Parks Commissioner, he's on the board of the Farmers Market. He's kind of the point person on this project. Would be available for a site visit and a conversation with the planning board about their proposals. If folks would be interested in participating in that sort of thing, again on the morning of the 25th.
That's great. Is there a time that would? Well, first of all, does that work for folks to meet down there and sort of discuss what the plans are that are being looked at right now?
Tim, what time is the meeting at?
That's what I was
You tell me. I think there was, relatively wide availability on that morning. So, if earlier works for folks, then great. If later works for folks, we'll do our best to work it out.
Personally, earlier is better for me.
Same.
Same.
Yeah, same for me.
So do we want to pitch 8?
Is 8 good for
Eight's
people?
fine.
Yeah, it's good.
It's good.
Does that work? Okay, great.
Okay, so we'll try for 8. And if that for some reason doesn't work out, then we'll maybe work offline to try to find a more beneficial time. But I'm thinking that'll be good. And so we'll post that as a meeting so planning board members can go and deliberate and talk and everything. And we'll be able to do that. So I will keep you posted on that once that's confirmed.
Perfect, great. Thank you, Tim, on that.
Yep.
Yeah. And we're fortunate to have Bill Madden working on that. So, so the next item, if there's nothing else, Tim,
That's all I got for now.
okay, great. All right. So at this time, we can open it up for citizens speak. If there's anyone in the public who would like to speak on anything that's not on the agenda, you'll have an opportunity to speak on that or on Zoom. If you are interested in speaking, please raise your hand online.
We have, and Jesse, you're going to have to forgive me, Jesse Bornoff. And if that was not correct, I apologize. But if you can give us your full name and address for the record.
Hi, that's my wife's name, Jessie. This is Tom Doherty, 247 Adams Street.
Great. Welcome, Tom.
So this is on the agenda, I guess, but I would just like to say it once, and it's a thank you, if that's okay to say it now.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so Tom Doherty, 247 Adams Street, Milton. I'd like to say and state thank you, and thank you again to the planning board members and to the Director of Planning Community Development, Tim Zarensky, and his staff, and also to the consultant for their work to try to determine the total number of acres of Milton land within half a mile of the MBTA commuter rail train system. That is to say, train stations Fairmont, Reedville, and Blue Hill Ave. That determination, that map, and that list of parcels, acreage, will be most important, very important in addressing the Attorney General's and the EOHLC's complaint against Milton, for it's now, which is now before the SJC. So I really appreciate the effort that's been made to address that. I won't go into any detail as to, my own sense of that, but summarily that where the situation involves with that respect a matter where there is less than 100 acres of developable land within a half a mile of those commuter rail stations that are themselves also within Milton. That's going to be very important in terms of the determination that therefore under the guidelines that have been put forward by the EOHLC, it's an adjacent community. So I want to say thank you for the work that's been ongoing with that on that, and I look forward to, I hope, the planning board being appropriately publishing its determination on that, so that as a matter of public record can be included within the the various ways in which that's going to be addressed before the SJC and otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay. Tim, are you seeing anyone else?
Yes, we have Somana Buba DM. And again, if I mispronounced that, I apologize. But if you can give us your full name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Buba Jeme. I'm a community member for Precinct 1. My address is 15 Union Avenue. And I'm here with Kyle, who's in a room, and I'll be mostly deferring to him. But we wanted to talk about the project we are proposing for with the DCR at 7 Brush Hill Road. So this is an old building that the DCI is looking to have a curator take care of, and we saw it as a good opportunity to have something in Milton, in this part of Milton, for recreational activities and other programming, including after school or community. There's a number of acreage that it will come with the lot with the building. And down south of that lot, we also have a park and recreation lot that could be potentially available to us to make this a larger project. So we're calling it the Nepotan Esplanade project. And then we've been going around in Milton with different boards and different committees to really understand what's possible and then how we can go about it. We have a lot of possibility we're looking at. Yeah.
I just thank you so much. I just wanted to let you know you are on the agenda for a presentation a little bit later, so you don't have to give it right now during Citizen Speak.
Oh, perfect. Sorry.
I'm glad
for that. Yeah.
We are looking forward to hearing you. We have one other item on the agenda, and then we'll be able to hear your presentation, and Kyle is here as well. So I just didn't know if you knew you are on the agenda to speak at that time.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. That's good. And Kyle will take over after that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, actually, we have a couple of little things, but all right. Yes, thank you. We will get to you as soon as possible. Any other hands up for Citizen Speak?
I am not seeing any.
Okay, great. Terrific. So at this time, we can now look to our update on the East Milton zoning overlay. And with us tonight, we have members from MPIC. And if you would like to come and join us.
Meredith?
Yes. Is Josh?
I actually thought that we were going to bump up the CPC presentations.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so.
Yeah, and so I told Josh to come a little bit closer to 7:30 as a consequence.
That sounds great. All right, let's stick to that then. That would be great. So Kyle, if you would like to come and join us, and we can move to hearing from two of our CPC applicants tonight. Good evening, and if you could just state your name and your address for the record.
Of course. My name is Kyle Johnson. I live at 127 Blue Hill Avenue, number 2.
Great.
Great. So I know we have submitted a CPC application, so I'm happy to answer questions specific to that, but I just wanted to give a brief little background and maybe engage in conversation about some other ways we'd love to collaborate with the planning board on this project. So I'm representing, we're a newly formed neighborhood group, very grassroots, calling ourselves the Neponset Esplanade Initiative, representing some of the neighborhoods roughly in the Tucker School area that have been interested in 7 Brush Hill Road, the DCR property, and in thinking about other development needs in our neighborhoods generally. So you may have seen recently that the DCR has requested statements of interest from groups who might be interested in becoming the curator, and I'll explain what that means, of 7 Brush Hill Road, the abandoned Parks building that was a Parks Police substation and now is not in use. The curatorship program is something DCR has been doing where they look for some entity to pay for repairs and renovations to some building that is not in use but is owned by DCR in exchange for an affordable lease long-term. So an example is the Speedway in Brighton. So that was actually a horse stables that is a DCR property that has become a multi-use public and commercial space curated by a nonprofit, the Boston Architectural Heritage Foundation. Yeah, Architectural Heritage Foundation, which is a nonprofit. So several of us in the neighborhoods have taken area in that interest as we saw that call for interest from DCR, because we have felt for a long time that there's a serious need in our neighborhood for spaces that serve our community. We are one of the most densely populated parts of Milton, have some of the most multifamily homes of any part of Milton, but have very few recreational spaces, very few community spaces, very few amenities like restaurants or markets. I think you could even make the argument that the neighborhood is a food desert because there's very few markets that are within walking distance. And it's an area, since it's already densely populated, where some people may not use cars or could easily be incentivized not to use cars if we had more walkability. So we've submitted a CPC application to request funding for planning and feasibility on a potential project, which is arguably putting the cart a little bit before the horse, but recognizing that that might be some time down the road before any of those funds would be available. We're now working on community visioning and engagement, very much at a grassroots level, but we're also seeking opportunities for support to do that in a more formal way. So we're asking the planning board to consider supporting a letter of interest to DCR, making the pitch that either the town or some combination of our organization in the town or some other group of partners could become the curator. And we're also would like to ask the planning board to support an effort to seek grant funding specifically from the MAPC for community visioning and engagement around this project and the surrounding parcels and other development possibilities we could have for our neighborhood. And I'm happy to answer questions about that or the CPC application broadly.
Great. So just to let you know, we were going to wait. Cheryl is our representative to the CPC group, and we were waiting to hear on.
Okay, so we did meet.
Okay.
And this week, and I did ask. And while there's no sort of formal process, applicants are encouraged to seek support from boards and committees in town. I asked if there was an interest in having it be specific, like we may have spoken about like historic applications, the historical commission, et cetera. And the view of the committee was that that would be up to the applicants, who they would seek to get support from. So I think, Maggie, you had said planning efforts, it made sense to come here. So I think, certainly this is a planning effort. I've had conversations with Kyle as they got sort of off the ground to, kind of give them some ideas about how the process could work in terms of how you kind of get grassroots going, how you get public process going, if there's, and I think Rob Levash talked with them about the CPC. They're going to come to an MPIC meeting in August and have the same conversation about support, because it's September, Julia, right? That the next round, yeah, the next updated application for the CPC is. So the committee determined that this is eligible. It is eligible application. And but we haven't talked anything further other than the fact that it's eligible, and they made their presentation, and they're encouraged to get this support.
And I'll add, we've had formal support from the youth task force already.
So maybe I missed it, but what is the actual function of the building going to be?
That's what we want to do a community visioning process around. Yeah.
So there's not. So I'm a firm believer that the town needs to have more public spaces. And, we did have the Kidder Library over there, which was a town asset, which unfortunately we dispensed of it. So that is unfortunate for that side of town that they lost that. Because, I grew up at Tucker, and I loved going to Kidder. So I was really disappointed in the sale of that specifically for that neighborhood. So I do think we should support the town trying to rent it. I think I said this a couple weeks ago, but I don't know if we should be taking a position at this point in time as to if it should be a group or a town effort, or, I'm not sure of the process really.
Yeah, so
I'm a little bit unclear with the CPC process.
I think because the CPC is a year out before the funding would be available, the conversations that I've had was, well, maybe the planning department or the planning board or the master plan implementation committee can help them with visioning, and as they seek possibly MAPC funds, do we need a matching grant? Can that come through one of the board or the committee or the department? Because we've all talked about a lack of amenities in that part of town. And there was, Tim's been interested in planning for that part of town, just other things kind of, rose to the top like MBTA communities. So I really do feel like, this is grassroots at the moment and they're seeking town support. So I support their effort for the CPC funding, and I'd like to have us see whether it makes sense for us, the department, or MPIC to help with the visioning until they do get that funding, because the visioning will help determine what some of the uses could be, and that will come from the community. And my understanding is there's a 3-acre parcel that's under Parks jurisdiction right next door, so some kind of recreational use tied to community use, whether it's playground or community gardens or whatever they all decide is the highest demand or interest from the neighborhood. So, but leading sort of, not all the neighbors are like used to community sort of engagement, leading a planning process. So they're looking for some help with doing that, right, Kyle?
Exactly. And I believe, some planning work would have a benefit regardless what ends up happening with DCR, since, there's interest in doing work in that part of town, and with the town parcel that we already have, what is possible there, I think would be a great conversation for our neighborhood to have.
In my understanding, there's also a kayak access
There
for
is.
kayak launch,
Yep.
which I think would be really wonderful for that part of town to have an opportunity for recreation. I know even if youth are involved, there needs to be an activity behind it, which is
Exactly.
constructive. Kids will just come and be babysat, especially high school age. But if there's a engaging recreational, I see that just as being a great contribution to the community.
Just one other
Yeah,
thing I was
yeah.
thinking before I forget. Kyle, I know you've talked with Parks and Rec as well. Can you give us an update on where that is, that conversation?
Yeah, we just know that they're generally supportive, but we need to have another conversation about what their formal role would be in planning still.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thanks.
So we didn't have on here to vote on anything specifically tonight, because I didn't know what what information was going to come back from the CPC committee. But I think we do have it on the agenda. Tim, I believe a discussion for next Thursday's meeting.
Yes.
Yep. So we can
vote then.
We can vote then. What I think would be helpful is if you could send us something in writing what we would be voting for specifically, which I think is Maggie's question. That what is it that you're seeking that we would be voting for? And I think you've explained it quite well, but that would be just helpful to have that stating that it's seeking additional funding for community input.
So Tim, I think you had reached out to MAPC. Well, one of the conversations I had with Kyle was, grant funding. And, then we were thinking, well, maybe MAPC could help with that. And Tim was going to look into that. So I don't know, because I don't know if it needs a sponsor. So Tim, do you have, in terms of what we might vote on? So there's kind of two things to vote on. One is support with CPC, and then another would be any other role, right, that the town would have in helping with the visioning.
So when you say support, you mean financially the planning board would?
Well, the first one is just not financial. It's just support the application.
Sure.
The second one would be, do we want to have a role in helping with the visioning? And it could be through engaging MAPC, but through either planning board funds or MPIC funds and or a grant from MAPC. But remember, like part of the East Milton overlay, why the MPIC is here tonight, is that had matching funds from MPIC. Over the years, we've kind of used MPIC and planning board for various planning initiatives, and sometimes it's planning board, sometimes it's MPIC. So, but that's why I was kind of curious if Tim had the conversation with MAPC, so we can kind of see what that second part of the ask might actually look like, because I don't really know yet.
Right. But I don't think we need to vote on that yet.
No.
Yeah, I've reached out to them. We're kind of corresponding on figuring out who the best folks over there to kind of introduce this proposal to R and kind of figure out how they can help. A lot of folks on vacation this week, but I'm expecting to hear back from them in the next couple days and set up a conversation and kind of figure out, what type of assistance they'd be able to offer.
Great.
So I guess I'm still just a little bit confused because it's a grassroots effort. And what if this grassroots effort has a certain plan, and then from the town side, we identify another need? So I think we should be kind of a unified supporting, and I guess that's my confusion.
Well,
maybe that's why it's the process I'm not understanding. So I'm fully in support of the town reaching out to DCR and renting it.
well, I think Kyle can explain. He did approach at least the chair of the select board, if not the full board, about the town taking the lead. But even if the town took the lead, I think community engagement and community support of what the town would do with it, I think, is what they're looking for. And so it's a little bit undetermined. Like if it would, I think the neighbors don't have the funds, to maybe they would have to raise them if the town declined. But at the moment, it's what's a good use for it. And then, would the town have an interest in it? And if not, would they be looking to some other way of seeing it happen based on what they identify as support in the neighborhood? That's my understanding from conversation with
Yeah, no, I
Kyle.
think that frames it well. I think you can think of us as just a group of citizens who would like the town to help us think what could happen.
And I do, so I just kind of feel like maybe the town should be engaging, not necessarily the grassroots, because then
we are the town.
Yeah, so then we should be reaching out. And then, so it just, and again, it's just a process question. So it just seems to me we're putting the cart before the horse, and I'm not saying I'm against it or anything. Would it appear better, not, maybe that's not the correct word, but the town, if the request is coming from the town to
The request
DCR.
to who, Megan?
To DCR to.
I think they're open to how that works.
To lease it.
Yeah, they're open to how that would work.
It would have to be the town would have to be.
Because my understanding is other businesses, like, could be putting in a request or putting in their ideas for this
So
building.
just let me say that it will be a competitive process with DCR.
Yes, I'm trying to help us look more competitive.
Yeah, and if it is the town, it would be the select board.
Yeah.
Right, so, but in terms of the sort of how to get to a place of here's what it is, the select board doesn't do the really planning efforts, right? So, but they would like to, I think DCR would like expressions of interest by sometime in the fall. And so that's why it's not wanting to wait until CPC funding could come through, at least to have some indication whether the town would be interested. And I think part of this is really to help with the select board, right?
Yeah, we did go to the select board, and did not seem there was interest in moving on it in this moment. They were receptive and certainly, glad that we were talking about it. But there wasn't, they made no move toward supporting this formally.
They didn't know what,
Yeah, I think it's it's this.
They didn't know
who
what
takes the lead and
community.
Yeah.
So are you thinking MAPC would help you with an online survey or something, or?
Yeah, survey, some sort of community meetings. I know they've done that in other contexts to lead sort of a visioning process. Absolutely, yeah. And I think that could help hear and float what kind of some of the main needs and ideas are. And then also they would have some ability to speak to what's possible and what's feasible, knowing the area and the building. So I think having that expertise would be crucial.
That's great. Good, all right. Any other questions? Sean, did you have any questions or?
No, I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Great.
Good, thank you very much, and we'll have it on the agenda for next
Perfect.
week. You feel free to rejoin us, but
Did
Booba, yeah.
But did you have anything to add?
Is he still there?
Sorry.
He's still there, I see, but.
He had his hand up and then it's moving around on my list. But you should be able to talk.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot. I just wanted to thank the board for hearing us out, I guess. And then I just want to emphasize that we've been really going everywhere and trying to learn from everybody or hear from everybody. And that's a process we're going to continue to be inclusive, but also transparent. So along the way, we'll make sure that everybody's involved. Like Kyle said, ideally we'll have the town have this lead, but I think the select board made us understand that they're kind of busy right now, so they're happy to keep an eye on this. They didn't give us the formal support, but hopefully that will come. So we really just want to lead the way, and then whichever form we take it will be inclusive, and hopefully we'll have everybody's support. Because the one thing we really want also is, obviously we want the area to be beautified and useful to the community, but we also want to make sure that it stays within the town's control or realm. So even if the town is not the manager or the curator of the location, we will be able to support as citizens of Milton. But that's basically, I think, the last thing I wanted to add. But Kyle covered everything, and I really want to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're very appreciative. I'll put it all in writing.
Great, that's great.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, Kyle.
Thank
you.
for coming. Sorry. All right. Now, we also have another applicant, but I think they may have thought it was a little bit later. Is there anyone online from the Houghton's Pond Pavilion? I think Joe? Oh, you're here in person. You're Joe. Okay. No, that's great. You're perfect timing. So, yes, please come and join us. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. My name's Joe Kane. I don't know if you're done talking.
No, this is
right.
It's all yours. So, and if you can just state your name and address for the record.
Sure. Joe Kane, 22 Bradford Road, Milton, Massachusetts. So I am here to talk about our project at the Houghton's Pond Refreshment Pavilion. I think everybody might be familiar with the area or the spot, but it's the pavilion's been there for about, I think, 100 years, and it has been, I've never seen anyone operating it since I've been going to the pond for about 7 or 8 years now. And we were able to get the permit to operate for the next 5 seasons from DCR. When I say we, I mean the nonprofit that my wife and I founded. It's called Rise and Thrive Education, Inc. And we sort of decided or thought, like, maybe this needs a different sort of business model to be functioning or to be open to the public. And so far, it's worked out great. We've been able to open. I'm a high school teacher. My students are involved, and they'll be operating the pond. This week, they've been working on the social media campaign, so pay attention to your Facebook and if you have TikTok or Instagram, those in the coming weeks, because the stuff will be out there. What led me here is a application to the CPC, right? You look familiar?
Yes.
And the goal with that application and for being here is really just to try and get some support with rehabilitating and restoring and reviving the structure that we're in. It is in need of a decent amount of repair. Like we've raised some funds privately and been able to do a decent amount of work, fixing the tables, making sure there's no nails that can hurt people and things like that, trying to make it safe for visitors at the pond and of the pavilion. But there's a lot more to be done just to, I think, make the building not only safe, but more welcoming and really stand out. It's just a beautiful space if you've ever seen it. And even in its disrepaired state, I would say it's still beautiful. So we're hoping that we can get some money to make some of the fixes and repairs that we won't be able to. And I had a presentation and stuff. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But I wanted to know if What I've learned a little bit about the history, and one of the things was that I think there's like 7 structures that were created by the MDC when it was first done, and this is one of the last remaining ones there, which is neat. And what I've noticed about the place is it was definitely designed or built before air conditioning, because somehow they've made it cool. Like in the past few weeks, I'm up there every day, and it's at least 15 degrees cooler, and there's always a breeze. So if you've been hot, this advertisement, come and see us at the pond. It's a nice place to sit down and beat the heat. So yeah, if there's any questions or if you need any information from me, I'd be happy to provide it. I'm here just trying to get support from you all as a committee, and reach out to the community at large and let them know we're here, and we'd love the support as we try to revitalize the area.
That's terrific. Are you seeking, is the state, do they provide any grant funding for, I would think that would be
Right.
sort of something that they would want to see rebuilt and
Right.
maintained as well.
Yeah, so, I'm into this for the first few months, so I became aware of CPC funding just through starting the project, and that being the town of Milton. And what seems to be, or what I think is perhaps true, is that the more sort of people we have on board, privately fundraising, town of Milton in which it resides, and the state, the more likely we are to sort of, I don't want to say get the biggest bang for our buck, but really be able to maybe meet the scope of the project where we're at. I think that having some life in the building is really important when seeking out state funds or things like that from maybe DCR directly. I know there's a process by which they make repairs and things like that. I'm not 100% familiar on how that works or what to do. But I think that if we were able to either privately or with the town of Milton match some sort of, then things become more possible, I suppose. That's just my guess. I don't know of anything. If I knew of a grant that I could apply for right now that would do this, I'd apply for it. So if anyone out there knows of anything, let me know.
Well, it sounds like a great nonprofit that you're
thanks.
that you're running, and you have a presentation. If you have, we can give you Tim's email, the town planner, and
Sure.
you could just distribute it to the board if folks are interested in knowing more about what your group is doing, because it sounds like a great program for the kids.
It's awesome. So it's a 68-week program for the summer school. I work at a non-traditional high school, alternative high school in Boston Public Schools, and we serve students who are a little bit older and are a little bit behind on their academic credits. So we have multiple graduations per year. There's one in August, there's one in January, and there's one in June. So students, we have 10 or 12 students right now that if they meet this program, they'll earn 2 academic credits and be able to graduate in August. And that's important for somebody who's trying to move on to the next step in life. They'll be able to start in college or whatever it is they want to do next, starting in September, as opposed to having to wait until mid-January. And then the program itself is as a teacher, I teach math, and I'm a special education teacher, and a lot of times, if anybody has teenagers, or you might hear when am I ever going to use this? And the idea with this program is to really try and introduce a more practical element and sort of a hands-on experience for the students, where they do 2 days in class and 2 days at the pond, and trying to give them as much responsibility as we can and learning as we go. So that's the mission of the academic side of it. In terms of the pond, it's really trying to give the community, what it deserves. I think the people there who visit the pond, who come there regularly in the summertime, first of all, are awesome. I've never eaten so much food. Every time I have the place open, people come up with plates of food. What do you want to eat? I'm supposed to be feeding you. And people are overwhelmingly kind. and very happy that we're there. But it's one of those things like, it's inspiring. Like, you just want to do better. You know what I mean? You just want to make it better. You want to make it a better spot. You want to listen to their feedback and listen to the kids' ideas and make it something that everybody can enjoy more. So I could talk forever about it. You probably guys have probably more.
Where is it in relation to the main parking lots? Is it across the pond by the baseball fields?
No, it's actually right when, you park, there's a playground. Everybody takes a left and goes to the beach.
Yeah.
Or the ballparks. We're to the right, right there in front of the field. So it's a pretty big structure. You think hard to miss, but people just walk by all the time and they're like, oh, I didn't know this was here, So
one of those guys.
Right, exactly.
It is a nice structure, historic structure.
Yeah.
And my kids were young, it was open, and you could get food there, which was really nice. And so bringing that back, I think, is great. And it seems like DCR is looking at, having users do more of their restoration, repair, upkeep than themselves. And so that's why the CPC application, and yes, I'm the planning board's rep to the CPC,
right.
so
Okay.
I did hear your presentation, so thank you. So I think if we're not voting tonight, but I do think it's something. You applied under historic preservation, I think, although probably could come under recreation too. The Nippons at Esplanade, I think, also could be recreation and historic preservation in terms of the 3 categories for CPC funds. So I don't have any questions for you.
I mean, I just have a couple of questions, but maybe it's not even relevant. Now, do you have a lease or a long-term lease with?
The permit is for 5 years. Yeah, so, and the idea would be, I don't know, this process, I imagine, takes a long time. And as we get further into that permit, like thinking about the future, I wouldn't recommend, like, the town of Milton put all this money into it if there isn't some sort of arrangement with, like, oh, okay, well, let's make this a longer term thing. I certainly, as the nonprofit permit holder at the moment, wouldn't want this to, like, go out for bid in 5 years and somebody else comes in. I would want to maybe look at some different things, because if there is a community purpose, or there are some other, I think, DCR projects that it is a sort of community service element, and maybe we could change that. But currently it's 5 years, if that answers your question.
Because I live relatively close to it, and I grew up close to it, so I remember when I was a child being able to ride up and get hot dogs, and just like Cheryl, my kids would do the same. So in my neighborhood, we don't have a lot of amenities.
Right.
So it was a great amenity for our neighborhood, because you got food, you got fields, you have a pond.
Right.
So I've used it a lot, and also my sister had special needs, my niece has Down syndrome, so I am really attracted to the whole alternative education part of it. So I would hate for you to build it up only to have your lease expire. Right. I think that would be a shame. It is a very pretty building, and it was covered with graffiti the past few years, and I think not only the town of Milton, but the state of Massachusetts, because it's a state of Massachusetts asset, would be really grateful for all of your efforts. And maybe Jim could get some of his Eagle Scouts over there to help out.
Yeah, the community support has been awesome from the town of Milton. I would say there's been a lot of inquiries to people that I haven't been able to meet, like community service and things like that. As the years go on, I think it'll be just like an awesome way to involve the community and hopefully extend it beyond, like, we're Memorial Day to Labor Day, but I'd love to have it open longer. And
well, you should, because I live and have a business in that neighborhood, and the hikers.
Right.
It is an untapped opportunity. Too bad it didn't happen before COVID, because you would have been a millionaire. But I think if you're able to extend it, into the fall season, I think it would be worth it.
Yeah, thanks.
Meredith, could I say a few words?
Yes, go ahead,
Yeah.
Sean.
So I guess to be fully transparent, I've known Joe for about 10 years. When Joe came to Milton, I know his brother Charlie quite well, and a bunch of years ago when we were both better fit, we were working out together. So I've known Joe for a long time, but I wouldn't consider Joe a close friend. Joe reached out to me several months ago and explained what he was hoping to do, and I have been in the building numerous times. I've helped Joe get the facility at least to a state where it could operate, and getting it to a state where it could operate required some electrical work, some plumbing work. Joe has put his own time and energy in there with his brother, making repairs and getting the facility to a point where it functions. He's too humble to really, I guess, talk much about his role. But Rise and Thrive it is a nonprofit. Joe will never make a dollar off of this, and he's not doing it for money. This is something that will be a resource for the community. It'll be an amenity for those that visit Houghton's Pond. And it also provide a tremendous purpose to help the students that Joe has working there learn practical skills that they can apply. And part of this is building their confidence and their self-esteem so that when they go out into the working world, they're able to advance themselves when they graduate from school. So, it is a win-win-win. And while it accomplishes all those things I just mentioned, it is a beautiful building, and it's been there for a very long time. I, like Maggie, was there when I was a little kid. I grew up in Milton, and my parents used to take us up there. We'd go for a swim in the pond, would have a hot dog, probably an ice cream too. And it's a really, really beautiful building. And it's not complicated to restore this building. I did provide Joe some assistance. Rob was ahead of me, where Joe had gotten to Rob, and Rob had provided advice to Joe, and I jumped in at that point to provide some support for Joe, so he could calculate what repair work was needed and what it might cost, and that was necessary for Rob to be able to consider an application. For the CPC to be able to consider an application for Joe. So I think I look forward to seeing Joe move this along, and obviously I'm only one member of the board, Joe, but I'm pleased that you're here tonight. I'm enormously happy that you're doing something like this for the community, for those that use Houghton's Pond, and for the students that benefit from it as well. So I look forward to your process here, and I wish you the very best, and I'll continue to support you personally as I have so far.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Terrific. So I just would ask the same thing that you, because I know Cheryl has seen what your application says, what you're asking for. Before we would vote on something, we just would, if we could have sort of what you're asking for in your application. If you could send that to Tim Zawinski, our town planner, and
Okay.
or Julia, sorry, send it to you? Okay.
She has it.
Well, you have it.
She
yeah,
can
so
distribute it.
If you could distribute.
Oh, perfect. All right. Thank you so much.
Wait, so Julia, yeah, I'm sorry, I should have asked you, I forgot you were the staff there. So
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind just sharing that with our.
Both of those applications.
Both of the applications with our board, that would be, just so we can have that if we are going to be voting on something. That's great.
Awesome.
Terrific, thank you for
Thank
taking
you
the
all
time
so
to
much.
come tonight. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for your time. I
Yeah.
really appreciate all you guys. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. Okay, so Tim, do we see Josh here, or should we?
Yeah, he is.
Josh.
He's here.
Okay, great. So, so now we will welcome Josh once he's
So because we have a quorum of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, I'm just going to open our meeting.
Yes.
Okay, and we have Roxanne Musto and Regina Campbell Malone as attendees. If they could be promoted to panelists. And then we have Tabor Keeley, Dick Burke, and Elaine Benson. And if you'd like to come to the table so that you can participate in the discussion.
Yeah, welcome. Welcome. Good to see you all.
So just, if I may, for the other planning board members, we had a discussion at one of the recent MPIC meetings about just status updates of things that the committee's been involved with as we move towards putting our report together of how the master plan's been implemented. And of course, the overlay zoning in East Milton Square was one of the major recommendations in the plan. And due to some sort of quick need of funding to provide matching funds, the MPIC provided matching funds for the work with MAPC. And so we like to get updates on what's been happening with, things that have been funded through the MPIC. So that's the background for having this. We said we'd like an update, so it was suggested we just do a joint meeting for this update.
Cool.
Great.
Okay.
All right, and I see Josh with us.
Great. Good evening,
Welcome.
everyone.
Good
Good evening.
Yes, you go
Planning
ahead and
Board,
start.
and good evening.
Hi, Josh.
Hello, everyone. And hello to the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Good to see you all. Josh Fiala with MAPC, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I will share my screen, and I do have a brief presentation to just provide that recap to the MPIC, and then also to provide some discussion with the Planning Board to help advance our work. All right, hopefully you all can see that now.
Yep, we can see it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I will do a brief recap and summary for the benefit of the MPIC members, bring you all up to speed on the process which we've had underway for, I guess, almost a year now or so. And then we did, as you all, I'm sure, recall, re-release the community survey, which went back out, and we did receive a really tremendous response, and want to thank those who helped with that outreach. And we'll go over the sort of net change in the feedback that resulted from that increase in respondents. And then also just talk a little bit about the recommendations and then the design guidelines aspect of the work, which is really the largest piece that remains. And thanks to the Planning Board, of course, as always, for your efforts in providing the time on your agendas to discuss this important work. So just a brief summary and recap for everyone involved. I think it's even helpful for us to, go back to the roots of the origins of this work. Of course, dating back to the town's townwide master plan and efforts around strengthening East Milton Square as a vibrant mixed-use district for the town and really a center of town community activity. So it's, I'm sure you are all aware, this is one study and process in a chain of really a lot of effort that has gone into thinking about East Milton Square and building up to these zoning recommendations. It's our job and role really to help working with the Planning Board to help push those zoning recommendations to a point where we think there's both well-defined and well-supported package of zoning that can hopefully get through a town meeting vote. We think that we're pretty close to that, and I think the results that we're going to talk through this evening do show that work. And so the purpose really is, in regard to that zoning, mixed use, of course, that's the focus, but it's also in part to create zoning in East Milton Square, which provides more viable pathways for redevelopment than what you have today And so the results that you're seeing today in East Milton Square is that projects are seeking alternative paths for approval. You've seen those two recent 40B projects and proposals and the results of that process. And that's really because in part, the zoning that currently exists does not allow that viable pathway forward. Here is the reminder of those previous studies, the most recent of which is really a very strong foundation for this work, which was the looking forward planning process. And we've built our effort upon that, but also not taken for granted any of the recommendations in that work and really interrogated with the community each of those details. And so that's where we are sitting today. I think it's also important to look back at this very simple Venn diagram, but this Venn diagram shows up in the survey results that I'm showing you the updates for this evening, that we are dealing with at least three parties, but three very important sort of abstracted stakeholder groups that we're trying to find shared pathways to a common interest and a common way forward through the zoning. That includes the surrounding neighbors, the East Milton Square neighbors and neighborhood, and the larger town of Milton, which has residents in other neighborhoods, an interest in East Milton Square and from other parts of the town and other residents. And then also, of course, property owners and would-be developers that either own properties today or might not own properties today, but might be interested in investing in East Milton Square. And hopefully what we've been trying to find is that happy sweet spot where each of those parties and probably some other stakeholders that aren't represented as directly in this Venn diagram can find a successful outcome that would attract and invite future investment, or not, we're not thinking about next year or even the year after, but over the longer arc of really providing fruitful opportunities to keep East Milton Square revitalized and vibrant as a place for the town. Just a very high-level summary of where this is starting to end up. The top table shows the existing zoning characteristics, which is largely a business district today. So the heights of 3 stories by right, 5 stories by special permit, those are for business uses. So those are not for mixed-use projects, which is why you're seeing that alternative pathway for approval occurring, because residential really is a component which is driving the viability of many of these redevelopment projects in the region. So you would like to see mixed use provided as a component in the approved uses of the zoning. So that's one of the primary changes that we've highlighted in yellow on the slide at the very bottom there, is that mixed use development would be allowed by right with site plan review, which would occur through the planning board. And that height would be limited at 3 stories. We've heard that pretty clearly in the feedback. And there are some other changes which I think are useful and valuable to point out. The change of the minimum parking requirement, I think, is a very important one as well for the viability of future development. And you see that currently is at two spaces per unit, which is derived from other districts, since it's not actually, residential is not allowed in the district today. And we would be proposing that come down to 1 space per unit. And then there would be a minimum as well for other non-residential uses, which are as they are defined in the zoning today. So that's a very brief, high-level look about what I think are pretty straightforward changes to the zoning, which do increase that development viability, which this is all about, and will show does have, we think, reasonable enough community support to advance. So let's just dive in. I guess I can pause there and just see if at the very high level, if there's any thoughts or questions or anything else that the MPIC members would like to catch up on. Otherwise, I can turn toward the updated community feedback.
Any questions from anybody at this point? Okay. No, I think, Jim, did you?
Yeah, just with the parking, it says maximum for multifamily 1 per unit. Is that a typo? Should that say minimum, or is that intended to be maximum on the second chart down?
Oh, yeah, you're right. We should have that same minimum. That was
good.
has been picked up in the other document, but not here. So thank you for that eagle eye. I'll update that for this slide.
We should have a conversation about that,
We
Josh.
should, yeah.
All right, we will have a conversation about whether that should be a maximum or a minimum. Thank you for the note, Tim.
Should we have it here, or should we just?
Let's not have it
Yeah,
at this.
we'll keep going,
okay.
but.
All right.
Okay.
All right, I will continue then. I'll put a note on that to return to that conversation. All right, so turning to the updated community feedback, and again, this is, I'm not sure if those who were involved in that additional outreach are in the room, but just a thank you to those who were involved in it. You can see the results of that effort. So previously we had a total of about 71 respondents, and that included participants in the community forum, which we hosted back in April. And the survey was reopened after our meeting with you all in May, and it remained open through just last week. And the updated total resulted in 739 responses. Those responses were mostly partial in nature, so people picked and chose which questions they answered out of the collection of questions in the survey. Most survey questions ended up with between 250 and 300 respondents. So not the full 739, but that was the number of people who were at least exposed to the survey and the information that it contained. And then we had quite a few responses as well. So thank you for all that, both from those who responded and those who helped get the word out. So as we look at what changed, so I thought it was important to do this comparison because we based our initial recommendations, which we've shared with the board, on the feedback as it had occurred to that point last time. I think it was important for us to understand the difference in responses in this expanded outreach and feedback so that we can see how those recommendations might want to be adjusted. In terms of who responded, we see more of a diversification in terms of geography in the town. So it was well concentrated in East Milton Square previously, and you can see that those who identify primarily as East Milton Square residents, that shifted downward from 71% to 57%. And we saw the most growth in those who self-identify as a visitor or patron of the square. We also saw a decrease in the amount who identify as living in East Milton Square and or a surrounding neighborhood from 87% to 62%. So you just see an expansion of voices in other parts of the town. I'm not sure if that was the intended result of the outreach, but that's what we see in the data. And then accordingly, those who visit East Milton Square daily as a self-report also decreased somewhat as well, probably just because of the nature of where those increases in respondents are living in the town. So this, now we go, the survey shifted at this point to go through each of the recommendations in a little more detail and gather feedback on them. So this is a good, more detailed review for the Master Plan Implementation Committee members and a good refresher for the Planning Board. But this was the recommended zoning boundary that we are contemplating. It reduces some parcels which are residential in nature and split between zoning districts today. Those are primarily on the east side of the square, and you see those in blue outside of the black line today in this diagram. And then we've added a few parcels which are commercial in nature today and should be a part of the business district in our opinion. And those are those parcels in pink on the left side of the square, or on the west side of the square. And so that was the proposed boundary. We asked a few questions about the boundary. In general, this is a little unclear to me why, but the support for the boundary in general decreased from 58% to 38% as we expanded those respondent numbers. It did show up in some of the open comments that there might have been some confusion that this overlay process was being conflated a little bit with the 3A process, which might have resulted in some negative feedback, I would gather. But if you look at the details of why the zoning boundary is the way it is drawn, the support is still decent. So residents who would strongly support removing the current residential properties that are split zone today. That also decreased a little bit, but it's still reasonably supported. So from 56% to 42%. We can discuss potentially if those want to be left in, but I think we've talked quite a bit about the split zone and also the sensitivity of the residential properties. I think this is a way to add additional buffer to those residential properties in the district. And then residents who strongly support adding the current non-residential properties, those on the west side of the district that I showed on the previous diagram, also decreased in support, but I think in this case are still almost at that 2/3 mark. So from 70% to 58%. So a little less clear in terms of the support for the exact boundary, but then I think what you'll see in the other recommendations is that some of the support actually is still quite strong or even grew in some cases. In this case, talking about the uses specifically, one of the recommendations is to decrease the allowed uses so that future use, that wouldn't affect current uses, they would be grandfathered in the district, but future uses of this type we would not want to see more of in the, for the purpose of increasing the future vibrance and sort of mixed use walkability of the district. So those suggested uses were future sales rooms and repair shops for motor vehicles, garages, filling stations, storage warehouses, and undertakers, which are all allowed under the zoning today. And then also to remove the smaller scale residential uses, single family homes, et cetera, which are allowed as well. There's a really good support for this in both the previous iteration and current version of the survey responses, 83% to 85%. And then also, this is, I think, one of those foundational recommendations that we highlighted previously is to allow mixed use by right for 3-story or 45 feet with site plan review. And this lost a little bit of support, but is still hovering at a pretty strong position relative to a town meeting vote. So it went from 76% supporting through strongly support as their answer or support down to 61% for that approach. The moving from a height taller than that, as was indicated in our discussion at the last planning board meeting and we've heard throughout this process, is likely at this point a bridge too far, and you see that in these results as well. Although I would say the disapproval softened a little bit, but not dramatically, or would indicate any really change that we should act upon. So those respondents who strongly oppose or oppose going to 4-story or 55 feet, and this was framed as a special permit option that would be incentivized through other benefits to the district or to the town. So that opposition grew a small amount from 54% to 55%. And then for those, a similar setup where we'd have a special permit incentivized height change to 5 stories or 65 feet. That went, got a little less opposition for some reason, but is still pretty strongly opposed, with either 84% previously or 72% when you combine strongly oppose and oppose together. So I would propose that sticking with a 3-story, 45-foot height by right is a supported enough and strong enough change that it would be one of value to bring to a set of town meeting changes. As we turn toward parking, which has been another, which we flagged in just a moment ago as an issue to talk about, but has been another, I would say, contentious issue throughout the discussions. It was interesting that some support did actually, or I guess the opposition softened a little bit, maybe not the support increase. The support did increase, but what we've measured here is the strongly opposed and opposed viewpoints. So the idea here is to reduce the parking requirements to increase development viability. In this case, we were talking about reducing the minimum parking required for residential uses, which would allow more viability on a redevelopment property. Of course, as was just hinted to in the conversation, in general, and we explained this in public meetings and other meetings with the planning board, the planning field is moving toward parking maximums, not parking minimums, and letting the development really drive the what is necessary for parking while providing an upper maximum. Parking minimums are being seen more and more as an artificial baseline, which is not market driven, and therefore could create some issues for both financial viability and just what the development might need, which is best determined by those who might market and try to lease or sell the project. So you see that those who strongly oppose that recommendation moved from 49%, strongly oppose and oppose, excuse me, moved from 49% to 38%. So a little bit of softening on that opposition in this round of surveying. And then those who strongly oppose or oppose reducing the required commercial parking ratio as well also softened. So good. I think that's a good sign because this is a valuable and meaningful recommendation as well. I'll continue to pause on the maximum minimum discussion, just get through the rest of these. We're almost to the end of the updated feedback on the survey. And then we see continued support for and real strong desire for focusing on parking and traffic mitigation and having that be a requirement in the zoning. And you see that support came down just a touch, but it's still, this is the most strongly supported item we have. And it's one of those which we've heard is a major concern throughout. And I would say, well, I'll just leave it at that. But traffic is not necessarily driven by the development in the square itself, but there is a lot of pass-through traffic occurring. So we have been talking about that in our meetings and wouldn't want to see the square suffer in terms of its mixed-use development potential or its ability to be vibrant because of external contextual traffic conditions which will not be solved or worsened in many ways by this more local and specific type of change. So with the next two sections are more about sort of next step conversations and getting your opinions on the recommendations and the design guidelines, but I'll pause here and just see if there's any reaction or feedback to any of the survey responses.
Meredith, if I could,
Yes.
I do have a couple of comments.
Yes, Sean, go ahead.
Oh, great. Josh, nice to see you again. And thank you for all your hard work. I have an opinion that the data points, we've talked a lot in the presentation, reflects the changes from the 416 survey to the 711 survey. My opinion is the 416 survey doesn't even matter. We had 71 people that participated in that. We have 739, I believe, that participated in this survey. We never discussed, I don't recall, in the 71 person survey, whether they answered all the questions or they didn't answer all the questions. So I understand what you had said earlier, Josh, that somewhere between 200 and 300 questions were answered. But I guess my point of view is I don't think it's even worth discussing that something moved from 49% with 71 people to 38% with 739 people. We have 10 times the number of people responding. The data that means the data that has meaning is the data of the 711. So the notion that we're even putting any thought or time into how something went from 55% to 41% when the survey was only 71 people, I just don't think it's not worth anything. It doesn't mean very much. It was only 71 people. We have 739. I'd almost eliminate that column under 416 and focus only on the percentage under the 711 column.
I think that's fair. I think that what we're trying to show is that there's actually continuity between those two data points, and understanding that the second data point is more, broader and in depth in terms of respondents. But we have based our initial recommendations not only on the 71, but also on the process to get to that point of the 71 was really a confirmation of where a lot of the recommendations were landing. We see with the 700 further confirmation of many of the same points And I think what the intention was to just show that continuity, because at that moment it was the best information we had, so it was where initial recommendations were coming from and being confirmed. And the way I have interpreted it is that I see in many of the same points, further confirmation, and in some cases, like around the boundary, perhaps we could reopen that conversation, discussion, and see if there are changes that are valuable or not.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm sorry, Meredith, Josh, I think I expressed my concern back at the first time we had a presentation with 71. It's just such a small number of people, and I'm grateful that the community responded. I'm grateful that, Tim and the team drove engagement, and the survey, brought a lot more people in. So I can see, as someone who's conducting a survey, why you would look at previous to now 71 to 739, but and I'm sure there's some relative value there, but for example, respondents who strongly oppose reducing required residential parking to one space per unit, 49%. There was 35 people. That's to me, there's not a lot of value if the survey pool is that small. So I know you'll try to utilize any data that you have. I just feel that the data we should really focus on is the results of 7-11, and it's the best we have right now, and it's certainly 10 times more than what we had in the initial survey. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tabor, you had a question for Josh?
Josh, thank you for this proposal, or for this presentation. Tabor Keeley from the MPIC. My question on the parking here is relative to the commercial side, and the one space per 1,500 is really not adequate for customers. That's only going to be for staff. And it certainly wouldn't allow for medical or other things. Is there a reason that it's just a 1 per 1,500 and not done on a per use? And most zoning codes have it for use. And that would be, I guess, a standout or an unusual. Is this something new and different I've not heard of before?
Yeah, what I should clarify is that this was as the survey was written, and we have since moved off of this recommendation a bit. So now our recommendation in the proposed zoning is actually to still base the commercial parking on the use table, which is in the zoning currently. And so that would be more, as you just suggested, Tabor, as opposed to the one space per 1,500 square feet minimum, which was, trying to be aggressive in terms of reducing the parking that would be required to make it easier to fit on some of these, on some of the lots in East Milton Square that might be more modest in scale without having to assemble a bunch of parcels and, keep the scale in line with what the village is, the square is today. And so your confusion is correct, but the survey was sort of the snapshot at that moment, and we have moved off that a little bit. The other thing I would say that we think helps in that situation of moving the commercial to being provided per use is also having a zoning clause about a shared parking reduction, in which case, if there are uses which would use parking at different times of the day or have a seasonality or a different nature of peak, then they could potentially share spots and show that through the approval process with the planning board.
Thank you.
And we have one other member from MPIC. Regina, if you had a question for Josh, please feel free to go ahead.
I did. Hi, thank you so much. Josh, this is great. I really appreciate the deep dive into the data, and I actually really like the idea of considering the composition of the earlier respondents in terms of being very near residents versus users of the area. I think it's valuable to have that information. And I also think that since we had so many partial surveys, it would also be valuable to dig in a little deeper and see if, say, for the slide that you have up, if that 38% was not very many more than the 71 respondents, right? it is absolutely possible that because of so many partial responses, some of those numbers aren't 700 and some, right? Do you get what I'm saying? And so it might be nice to actually have an understanding of when we had really high numbers for the 7-Eleven survey versus when we didn't have very high numbers. So maybe there would be a threshold that for 500 respondents and above or 250 respondents and above, we would focus on the 7-Eleven surveys only. But for lower values, it might be nice to see the actual comparison. I don't know. I think throwing out any data without massive justification is can be an error. So I do like that you presented both of those, and I'd love to see even more. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. And as you were speaking to it, I just did a quick scroll through the more detailed data I have in front of me, and it looks like the lowest total of the updated survey is in the neighborhood of, say, 200 respondents per question, and it peaks maybe around 337, I think, is maybe the highest. So
right.
that's
we're not talking 10 times for most of them, which I think is a valuable thing to know.
So that's the range, and I'd be happy to share the more detailed spreadsheet which shows those. You can look at all those results. So.
Josh, when you do that, could you also show us the detailed of the 71? Should we understand that the 71, everybody answered every question?
I think it was closer. I didn't open that file for the start of the meeting, but I'd have to go back and look. But I do think it was closer because it involved more in-meeting respondents than actual follow-up online surveys. So the previous 71 involved the forum attendees for the forum we hosted in April, but also the follow-up survey. And we had more people present in the forum than followed up in the survey. And I think therefore we got a better response rate. Most people did answer each question.
Sure, I was present that night. That must have been most of the 71 were the people that were present with us that night.
So even more educated about the issue because they had attended the forum.
Possibly, or certainly more interested, Regina. Certainly more interested. Yeah. And I don't want to take too much time debating the value of the data. I recognize your point too. But Adam, we have at least 3 times almost the number of respondents in 4. If you get up to 336, that's you passed 4 times the 71 number, right? So it's that's the reason I feel like that the data in the 7-Eleven is really valid, because it is substantially more. To your point, if no one filled, or if we don't have 739 with all answers, we do not have 10 times, right? That's the point you made, Regina. But I guess the point I'm making.
But also that they were more educated or invested in the topic because
I'm not gonna conject who's educated and who's not. That's not fair for me to say. But yeah. So, but the data is substantially greater. I guess that's the point I'm making.
Great. Yes.
Josh, can I see the data on the traffic question and the responses, please? Just looking at this, and not to get into who responded and how many people responded, but it seems to me there's an overreaching sentiment that traffic is a problem in East Milton. And I'm wondering, and you might be getting into your recommendations, is it going to be a situation where you have a plan, but unless you handle this traffic issue to the expectations of the residents and people in the town of Milton or use East Milton, that any sort of plan that we come up with might be a bridge too far for people to deal with?
Yeah, I think that's fair. We have heard about traffic a lot, and I think one of the traffic and height we've heard from our very initial stakeholder interviews all the way through have been recurring themes. I think that traffic is tough because it's it's not, we are not the right tool. A zoning overlay district is not the right tool to solve traffic problems, just plain and simple. I think that an unfortunate dynamic is occurring where the perception of traffic always getting worse is limiting the community's ability to see the value in a zoning change such as this. And I think whether or not zoning changes in this way, traffic may continue to get worse for people who live in this area. And they seem to be connected for a lot of residents, but they may not be. And over the long term, at least this is, the idealistic planner speaking, but over the long term, it is the type of development which we are trying to create here, which is more walkable and would get people out of their cars more, that will actually help reduce traffic. The more you can get people to do any other mode of transportation besides driving for an errand or for a simple task around town, the less traffic there is. It's one less car on the road. And so the more we can make places like East Milton Square walkable, bikeable, and friendly to people who are not driving, the more over time that will help work as a pattern. But that does not deal with those who are passing through because they're going from, Quincy to some other place or heading into Quincy or whatever the case may be. And the fact is also that these are exits and on-ramps for I-93. And so there is just some built-in traffic that will be unsolvable by a local zoning project.
I understand that, but I'm just theoretically asking, do you think that, we can come up with the best plan, and a long time ago I was a planner and get very frustrated. You put together a plan and it doesn't move forward. And I'm looking at some of the reasons why some very good plans don't move forward. And when I'm looking at this data, it seems to be a very strong sentiment, both in the April 16th survey and the July 11th survey, that the people are saying, listen, we have a traffic problem. Don't talk to me about what you're going to do and change things on me unless we can deal with this issue. I'm not saying this has to do with you and your expertise and your purview right now. I'm just thinking in a macro sense, is this something we should be looking at with the zoning overlay, but also with some sort of traffic mitigation plan at the same time?
I think that would be helpful. I think it is a very tricky problem to solve. We have regional traffic flows, and it's hard for a single town to influence and manage those traffic flows. But I do think whatever the town could do to study and try to help mitigate the traffic, particularly what we've heard a fair amount is a recognition from neighbors and residents that there are arterials and there are main streets, and they understand traffic is going to flow through those places. But I think there was a lot of concern around traffic on residential streets is one of the things we heard a fair amount about, and also parking on residential streets.
And I think it's also a very strong feeling from people in East Milton Square that they're not part of the problem. So the idea is that we can make it so that they can walk to where they need to go. They're looking at some sort of relief before we go back to them with some sort of a plan and how to change their world.
Okay, Elaine had a question.
Yeah. Sure, Dexter. Okay. Great point. Thank you. Elaine, did you have something? A question?
Just a point of clarification. For the special permit 4-story, 55 feet, was that, I don't recall the question in the survey, did it specify what it included in terms of commercial, mixed, and residential, and did it include all of those?
So the materials the companion presentation and recording of the presentation we gave at the forum, it was discussing a ground story non-residential use with 3 stories of residential above. That would be the mixed use. So the allowed residential would grow by a story from 2 to 3, and then same from 5-story, it would grow to 4 stories above. So that would be the approach. And we have heard and sort of been invited to listen closer, I think, sort of again and again that the community does not want that height.
Okay, thank you.
Did you? Yeah, my comments are a little bit about everything that everyone has said. So, I understand that traffic isn't, your problem to solve, Josh, but it is, you have to make sure that you're not making it worse. So, I find it hard to believe that adding more density is not going to make it worse. And to Dick's point, I'm not in, I don't live in East Milton. I go there probably 3 or 4 times a week. But I do think we need to be careful about adding more traffic until we do, and I know we're not going to solve it, but try to help manage it somehow. So that's just a comment on the traffic. I just find it really hard to believe that traffic won't worsen by adding more people into a smaller area. And to the point of the survey respondents, it seems like, and I know we discussed it, but it seemed like the first survey was more for the people in East Milton who would be impacted every day. So their voices might deserve a little bit more weight than, say, my opinion, who I'm not there and am not dealing with it every day. So my concern was, even though we had more respondents, and I think Regina pointed out, they're not impacted by it. So I don't think they care as much about the parking situation. So they may not have a real opinion on it. And I'm wondering if your statement, Josh, was that the trend is looking at maximum versus minimum parking requirements. And I'm wondering, is that trend like in cities or in towns as well? Because we've discussed, Milton is a suburb, and most families probably have multiple cars. I have a family of 4. And I have 6 cars at my house, but so we're in a suburb, and I don't think it's realistic to think that people are going to be walking everywhere. We're going to the square and we're driving to the square, and I'm just going to be doing that, unfortunately. And so if we're going to be switching to parking maximums, I do think that we need to put up a policy in place with other departments. So we could create zoning, and Milton doesn't have overnight parking on our streets, but residents have the ability to go to the police department and request a hardship permit. And so my concern is, we're going to put a maximum, people are going to go and get a hardship permit, and we are making our streets more crowded. So before any zoning is implemented, I do believe that we should have reassurance from the police department that they are not granting hardship permits in these areas.
That's a good point. Yeah, we are finding that is the case in a lot of areas. Just to add, that is one of the concerns, that there currently is a lot of people parking on the streets. And unfortunately, East Milton, as wonderful as all the amenities are there that you can walk to when you want to go to the grocery store, the drugstore, people don't work in East Milton and they tend to drive. And the bus service has been limited in that area. So they're really, it's very different. I would see it very different as in the lower mills, where I would be, much more apt to reduce, the number of parking. But I think, and I'm trying to remember what 440, was it one and a half spots?
I don't remember the ratio. It's definitely
Do you
more
remember,
than one,
Tim?
but there's also
440
commercial there.
And there was commercial also, what the ratio was. But
I'd be interested.
we are moving towards reducing parking, but I think one spot per unit seems creating a problem. It may be creating another problem. So, especially with the commercial.
Sorry, I was trying to
go ahead.
go when I thought you were done.
Yeah, sorry. No,
sorry,
that's
it was a pause. When we were looking at the Milton Village zoning, I did some research, and MAPC had issued a study. And one of the things in the research that was interesting is that basically people who don't have cars and don't want cars and want to live a life where they don't need a car, they subsidize. They end up having to pay more for their housing because the developer was told they had to provide a parking spot or more than one for that household. When that household now is not getting the benefit of have made a life choice of not having the car. Having worked with developers for over 30 years, they're not going to build, and Dick as a lender is not going to lend if they don't think that there's a market for what they're proposing. And, so like 440 Granite Ave proposed what they thought they needed in order to sell those units and to lease that or sell that commercial space. They wouldn't propose something that they didn't think was going to work, from a business point of view. And so I think one of the things that people do is, think about Milton the way it is and their own lifestyles as the lifestyle that everybody has, and it's not necessarily the case. And so there very well may be people who want the kind of housing where they can walk, and maybe they'll have one car, or maybe they'll use a zip car, or maybe they'll use Uber, or maybe they will bike if they have an opportunity. We don't really know so much about that because we don't have that opportunity in Milton very much now. So I think that's one of the things that we need to be careful of, is projecting that that there isn't this kind of person and this kind of demand. That's, I think the one space per unit, maybe we ask Josh to come back with a little more data. I think they have a lot of data. I think he presented some of that before, but I think a refresher on that would be helpful. I think, Josh, you presented some from other communities that people had asked if you had anything that was more similar maybe to Milton. And
he never
it was
found
more
any.
urban.
It was more Roxbury and JP. It wasn't like Canton and Westwood and Dedham.
What I think is more important is to get the data on what the condo properties or apartments in Milton are. What is the occupancy of the cars there? Hendry's, are all those spots being used? 36 Central, I know all those. That's almost.
Well, I did make some phone calls again back then to the owners of 50 Elliott, so the Milton Hill House. And they had, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but the parking that they had was adequate for the use. And one thing I'll say too in my work again is that on the condominiums, one space per unit is what developers' clients won't go less than that. The city or wherever they won't build less than that. If they're being asked to do less, they don't. They say it doesn't work for them because they need it for the condo. But on a rental, yes, it will work. And so when you're putting in a minimum, you're not allowing for that rental with less. So if you put in a maximum, then you're allowing the market and whether you're going to get a smaller unit. If you say 1 or 2 spaces per unit and you're getting all 1 beds, or studios, and people who are going to take transit or do other methods, that development doesn't have the same need as a 2-bedroom condo development. But when you put a minimum on, you're making them do the same, even though their market is different.
Yeah, but I think what happens there is if you don't want the spot, you can rent it to your neighbor. Just like in the Back Bay. I mean, condo spaces are going for what, $100,000? It's ridiculous.
You're
There's such
having to
there's
build
such
it,
a
though. You're
demand.
having to go through
I
the
know,
expense
but
of building
what
it.
you're saying is that that owner is now subsidizing the cost of the parking that they're never going to use. And I'm saying it's an income opportunity.
Yeah, building the
It will never not be used. And then, I mean,
building the space is putting a car in the neighborhood, though, which we just talked about not wanting to do in terms of traffic and congestion.
I didn't say that.
Fair enough, Jim, fair enough.
So anyway, I had a 3-family at 17 School Street, one block in from Central Ave. And it was limited to 3-car parking. 3 units, 3 cars, that's it. And I had a hell of a time renting. It was two bedrooms and a 1-bedroom. Everyone who called had 2 cars. And it was very difficult to rent.
And what time frame was this, Jim?
About 10 years ago.
I think one of the real challenges we have in East Milton and how it transitions over the years, none of us really know, and we're making a great effort here to try to create an overlay plan so it can transform itself, right? That's the whole idea here. We want to improve it. But one of the great challenges we have, and Josh, what you described earlier is creating the kind of community where people can walk, and they don't have to drive, right? That's ideal. But we have an area that's already established. We have roadways that are already fixed. We have a highway that runs through East Milton Square. We have no flexibility on changing the roadways or the geometry of East Milton Square. The spaces that will be built in East Milton Square, either the ones that are built right now to replace existing businesses, or maybe something more significant that replaces what's there now, the spaces are always going to be small. We don't have a choice. They're limited square foot areas that will be built down there. The greatest likelihood is that anything that's developed as a commercial business in East Milton Square, because of the geometry that exists, they are more likely to be a restaurant like we already have, something that is boutique in nature, something that's novelty in nature, or something that is a simple small service. I think that the reality that I see is that food stores, and I suspect that there's many people in East Milton Square that drive to go to the food store, or stores where they're able to buy the essential goods require them to have a vehicle. I cannot see East Milton Square ever being developed to a community that all the essential needs that a person could get are within East Milton Square. Walk up and down the sidewalk through East Milton Square, and what you see for the sizes of the spaces that exist right now, the future East Milton Square will not look very different in terms of the sizes of those spaces. And when you consider viable businesses that function within small square footages, it's not going to be businesses that are where we can all walk to get the essential needs that we need on a weekly basis. It's not possible, and it's because the geometry was established an awful long time ago. The roadways are fixed, and all of the lots down there, and all of the lots within everything that we now consider the zone that Josh showed us earlier, they're all the same. They're all the same.
So one thing I would say is looking at capping at 3 stories and raising the parking limits, it's just physically not going to be possible, except maybe on the fruit center property, or if somebody buys 6 small parcels and combines them. When Josh goes through and he shows us the analysis before, if you look at trying to park, you're going to take your whole ground floor to park, unless you go below, and then the lots are too small to put a ramp in, as we saw with 440 Granite, which is much bigger than a lot of those parcels. So, we're going through this exercise, and I think, Josh, we've talked about this too, it's not worth going through an exercise where we know we're going to make it really, really difficult to ever use this zoning. I mean, we've had zoning on the books in Milton where it was for cluster development, and apparently it wasn't used for 20 years because it just didn't work. So we have to also, I guess, look to you these things are all calibrated such, like in Milton Village too, where we had a couple of developers take a look at it and pencil some things out, and we found that it was just barely going to work for things, and we haven't actually even had an application in the several years since it's been on the books, and maybe it's not calibrated quite right. We don't really know. But I guess, you know, you had said at one point that the development community will tell us whether this works in terms of whether they apply they submitted any applications under this zoning. But I do think it's important for you to kind of give us feedback on, you're going to cap a height at something that doesn't allow you to park on a level, you know, so it's giving you, you know, 2 levels of built space. And if you put a requirement for 50% commercial on a small lot, you're going to get maybe a handful of parking spaces is it. So it's not going to get you anything better than what you have today in terms of an opportunity. That's my concern.
So maybe we should put a pin in this.
I agree, and thank you for raising that. I also wanted to go back. I politely had my hand up for a while. I know it's really hard to see it. That you know, I think when we consider the local neighbors and their wants versus the broader public in Milton, I think it is important to think about that. I don't always think it is, you know, 100% necessary to follow exactly what the nearest residents want if it's not, especially if it's a public good as opposed to a commercial endeavor. So I just wanted to add that piece, that yes, I always think that we want to have an idea of what local, you know, micro communities want, but not to the exclusion of everyone. And I think when we're talking about parking and traffic, yeah, I think it might make sense to consider that the special permit option, you know, or asking whether the special permit option could be used to increase the amount of parking, right? That only if the first floor or lower floors are used for parking would that be even a possibility, right? To see if that might have a little bit more traction than just, you know, this idea of a 4-story, you know, behemoth in some people's minds. And then the last thing I'll say is, I have heard the same argument about parking on the street and how undesirable that is. And you'll have to forgive me, having lived in Roslindale, having lived in Jamaica Plain, and other communities where parking on the street is allowed, I must be ignorant as to why that is such an issue, to have some hardship permits for folks that need it. So I would love someone to help me to better understand the legacy of on-street parking in residential areas here in Milton or beyond, because it's something that I have heard multiple times and I just don't get yet.
Well, did you have a question too? Oh,
Comment, but did you want to answer or something?
well, I can answer. Well, I don't know if I have all of the answers historically, but it does urbanize an area. It makes it feel like a much more of an urban setting to have street cars on the streets. Is essentially, you know, my understanding of it. It's, you know, historically, I have always thought myself, you know, would you want cars out in front of your street? And I think most people don't want that overall. And I think it's really never been a question in Milton. It is in some neighborhoods. It really is an issue. There's parts of, and especially in the west part of Milton, where there is there's more 2 families, as the previous speaker said, more multifamily, 2 and 3 family, 3-deckers, where just because of when they were built, turn of the century, a lot of those are very old properties. They're large properties on very small lots. So when multiple families are living there, it tended to not have as much parking because when they were built, most people did only, like families only had one car. It was not typical of, a lot of families couldn't afford a car. They would have 2 cars. They would have 1 car and there wasn't space to park it. So I think when it started, it just eventually has developed into a situation where it's become a nuisance for the neighbors to have all the cars being shuffled in and out and just having sometimes hard to even pass through because they're such narrow old roads. That I think
There was also, it was a public safety issue for a long time for some of the narrow streets.
Right.
You have cars parked on both sides of the streets, your police
Exactly.
officers and the fire department will say this poses a public safety issue. Going back to what Regina said, people do have an option. It's fairly simple. You go up to the town, you go up to the police department, you file an application, you get a hardship permit, you pay $25, I think, because I had to do it at one point.
Yep, that's what it is, because I have to do it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So it would just be $100, and then we worked it down to $25, and then they know that your car is paying your excise tax in Milton, and they can take a look at your street. They know your street and say, this is fine. We know how many cars we've issued hardship permits, right? So if it doesn't cause a public safety issue, then we move ahead. It's just in some of those streets where people, and we know the streets. You can see the streets where cars are parked on both sides. And
that's fair, and I think parking enforcement should be able to take care of that, right?
We would think so. We would hope so.
Yeah. So yes, back to that is an issue. So.
I was going to add on, I had 2 other comments, but on the parking, one thing I've noticed in East Milton is that it seems like a lot of people who park opposite sides all over on the residential streets is then maybe this is partly assumption, but I think from what I've heard is that it's to mitigate cut-through traffic and speeding. But I think one of the challenges with it is that it becomes a safety issue because in some locations you cannot, and this is not to say I don't agree with on-street parking. I just think better regulations in terms of like what side of the street, because you can't fit emergency vehicles down. Sometimes you go in and you have to back up to let a car through because they're already halfway through, or you've got kids coming out with balls and you don't see them, and it's just there's a lot of concerns. But that wasn't even what I was really going to talk about. I think, oh gosh, I totally lost my train of thought. I was going to say, the maximums. I love that idea. I think one of the things that I think of when we talk about the developer's required to create 2 parking spots per unit, I think it increases the cost of the units to either the renters or the people purchasing homes, and for folks who are maybe just starting out in their career, professionals living alone, or retirees who might be living alone or just have one car. I think it becomes a barrier to entry, when you're talking about the cost of that unit. But I also just wanted to, I know it was brought up earlier, like we're creating this potential zoning for an area that's already super congested. I live in East Milton. I agree that it is, somewhat congested. I think, though, I just wanted to get some clarification because I believe Josh mentioned earlier that the intention of this, and correct me if this is not correct, but the intention is to kind of get back some control where we know that over time some development's going to happen, especially with 40B, with a growing population. And so in putting forth something that the residents somewhat feel comfortable with, that at least you're gaining a little bit control back from what might be something like a very large scale 40B.
And just on top of that, I'll just add to that, it was the residents of East Milton who came to the planning board years ago who asked for this work to be done. So it was coming directly out of the community. Yeah. It's just taken a long time. There's been various studies, but it was so that they didn't have to negotiate with each developer and go through a really difficult process, which they did twice now, residents in East Milton, with 440 Granite Ave and then the 40B on Bassett Street. Those are long, drawn out, and they want a set of rules that does give opportunity, that they've worked through what they think is right, and then they can rely on a site plan approval process. And so I do think it's important to kind of remind ourselves that that's what started all of this.
So the problem there would be that we would have to make this almost as attractive as a 40B, but not quite, right? Well, that's what the zoning is going to have to look like.
Well, the thing is,
40B, like Falcone's, is 6 stories. 440 Granite was 4. Right, so we would have to do zoning that's like
Well,
almost there, but not quite, and by right.
No, here's the thing about it, though, is the zoning is going to set the value, right? Like, if somebody's going to buy some property, and they think, okay, the value is determined by the use, the highest value is the 40B, right?
Always.
But it's also has the, longer process, probably more expense because of that longer process, and maybe, is not something that particular developer or seller wants to have associated with their business. So having another path that's not just the business district zoning just gives opportunity for a redevelopment or a sale that a buyer or a seller knows the community supports. It's an easier path. They can just file and get going.
Just on the 40B issue being profitable, I would say that's not true. The 40Bs are not terribly profitable. They do them because it's the only thing left to do. They would much prefer to do market rate. Market rate is the only way, and if you've got to call it 10% versus 25%, that's a big change, and that's the profit, 15%. Plus, if you make more than that, the state comes in and takes it away from you anyway as a developer. So it's so controlled that most developers don't do it unless you've got, there are a couple of developers that's all they do, but they are not thriving, I would say.
So that is, the question is, where do we find the balance of what is economically viable
Right.
and what is the parking that will be, feasible for a development, but also meeting the demand of actually what the residents will be wanting and needing. So.
Well, I think Regina had an interesting idea about a special permit if you want to exceed the maximum parking. Rather than having it be the minimum, it's like there's no choice if you have to do that. But if somebody wanted to come back and exceed it, go through the special permit instead of site plan approval.
So
I like that idea.
Right,
Yeah, I'd
so
rather
it would
see
be a minimum.
I'd rather see a minimum and then
Yeah, but then
let the market decide.
But then you still have, the minimum is the minimum, then you're still going to have to build it. So like if
It's a
you,
one spot per unit, let's say. It's
Well,
the bare minimum I would
then you'd
wanna
have to
see.
get a variance if you wanted to do less. It still doesn't address the
I think it would be easy
issue.
to get a variance to do less.
Can I ask your opinion, just to understand your point of view? Why would you prefer the minimum with variance for more versus a maximum with a variance?
So I think it would be way harder to get more parking. The way the climate's going, the way the attitude is towards cars. And I feel that cars are very important. I mean, we're forgetting the fact that not everyone's healthy. I mean, I know when I go to the doctor, I go to Beth Israel. My wife's dentist is in Hanover. I mean, you're constant. And I guess Sean said it, Milton is just too small to make a true walking community. And my experience has been most people want, if you're living with your boyfriend or girlfriend or partner or your family, there's at least 2 cars per unit. And it's just, I think it's what the market in a suburb like Milton wants. And I just think to say you can only do 1 car is deterrent.
Do you think if you did say a maximum of 2, that you could also let the market decide, would the developer would decide between that 1 and 2?
Well, if you do a maximum of 2, you're not letting the market decide. I mean, what if you want more? But I get it. That'd be better than 1, sure.
So I think because there's a lot more that we want to get through while you all are here. It's very valuable. I think let's put a pin in this for tonight. This will require some real further discussion, I think, on trying to seek what that balance is. But I did want to. Did anyone else have any other questions other than the parking at this point?
Yeah, I just had a question about the business use. Is it allowed to exclude certain types of business? I kind of feel like that's discriminatory.
Isn't that what zoning is?
That was zoning.
No,
That's what zoning is,
No,
yeah.
it's zoning. So you can exclude.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like
I
a
do
gas station or
think-
something? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, so I think
Gas
it's.
stations, if you
Yeah, I was going to
Yeah,
say,
the poor funeral homes.
Well, I do think it's valuable having a local repair shop in your neighborhood because you can drop off your car and have it repaired, and then then you can walk home. So
This would be for a new use, for a
Yeah.
new
They're always grandfathered, and if they were to sell the business or the property, they can continue the use.
Okay, so even if it's a change of property owner, they can.
Still a grant,
It's
it's a
so
use.
it's the property.
It's not tied to the owner.
To the
Yeah,
owner.
exactly.
Because
Yeah, so the gas station.
my situation is
Yours is
different.
a little
That's why
different, but yeah.
I'm confused, because mine is tied to
Well,
the owner.
I mean, if I'm incorrect, Josh or Tim could chime in.
And mine's zoning. Mine is zoning too, and mine is tied to the owner.
I know yours is, yeah.
It's not a grandfather issue, because it was an original variance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does EV stations work? Like if you wanted to do a charging station or a bank of them, would that be considered a filling station or
I don't think so.
no?
But that's a good
Those are
question.
usually regulated separately, not as their own use, but are allowed sort of conditionally as part of parking regulations.
Repeat that, Josh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, the EV stations are typically in the parking regulations and more regulated as a condition of those parking regulations as opposed to their own separate use.
Oh, gotcha.
But one could argue that a good business model would be just to have, instead of a gas station, have EV charging.
Pretty soon.
Well, the idea is to have a walkable neighborhood opportunities, and when you have like 3 filling stations in a short distance, that you're taking away other valuable uses, potential uses there.
One, yeah.
I mean, and EV, you can do it in your parking lot. I mean, so to say I'd rather see a different kind of business than a full big parking lot that's just there for EV replacing a gas station.
Because I would think it would be very convenient, because you're getting on and off 93.
Right along the expressway.
I think it would be a perfect location, like going to the Cape or, coming back.
Well, they could replace their gas station with it. It's
Yeah.
grandfathered, I suppose.
Just add 'em. I mean,
All right,
but to
let's-
that, yeah, I'm sorry.
Let's keep moving. Can we? Let's just keep moving because we do have other things to get to. So Josh, if you want to continue, thank you very much for that discussion.
Sure, yeah, no, that was excellent, thank you all. And just to maybe center on the vision for East Milton Square, that there are other parts of Milton which are already intrinsically more auto-oriented and dependent. But I think what you have in East Milton Square over time is really the opportunity to build on its fundamental historic walkability to offer an alternative in the town that is different from some of the other places which are more car dependent. So I think that's what a lot of this is about. And so let me just jump to the recommendations. So these are a bulleted version. Again, we've shared a more actual zoning language, which I want to give you an updated version on based upon our continuing conversations, but we have shared that. And this is what a lot of the high points are from that. So again, reducing the future allowed uses. We were just talking about focusing on a non-residential ground floor to have that active street frontage and mixed use environment. Expanding where it makes sense and where it's possible the public realm, so thinking about where sidewalks might be more narrow and they could benefit from expanding, having more opportunities for outdoor seating and the like. And then respecting and sort of being careful about abutting residential uses and how the setbacks relate to that context. A 3-story mixed use height by right, I think that is a core feature, and if nothing else, like if this process results in a simple zoning change in which that is the sole, warrant article component, I think that is actually valuable to take to town meeting to provide that pathway forward for something possibly to work and provide that opportunity. 10% minimum open space, thinking about preservation and adaptive reuse of some of those important structures. Design standards are integrated into the language that we've proposed and kind of work off of the model established with the Milton Village zoning, requiring between 12 and 15% affordability depending on the scale of the development by unit size. And then also, we've just talked a lot about the parking, but I think parking is an important issue and somehow providing that flexibility, whether it's through a higher max. I like each of the ideas, a higher maximum, a maximum with the ability to have more through a special permit. That's an interesting idea. Or reducing the minimum. I think each of those are better than the current requirements. And then allowing shared parking reductions where that can be proven to the board's satisfaction. And then requiring traffic and parking impact analyses and mitigation. But I'll just make the point again that I think that a single property redeveloping in East Milton Square will not be producing the traffic problem that people are already troubled by and concerned with. So I think that I don't know at what level of service the intersections in East Milton Square are, to be honest, but the amount of traffic that would be generated by one of these new investments in mixed-use development in the square are not moving you from level B to level C in terms of how an intersection is performing. It's the throughput that's occurring through the square is quite large, and this would be a small proportion of that. And then just to kind of show the consistency with where this has all started from, these were the high-level recommendations from the looking forward process. So establish a new mixed-use district as an overlay. That is our proposed approach. Expanding the business district, we did propose that, as you saw in the initial boundary that we were talking about. It might not be as well supported as we would like. We think that's a very solid approach. The East Milton, or the Looking Forward study, talked about establishing sub-districts. Because we have landed on and are being responsive to community feedback regarding the height and staying at 3 stories, I don't think there's as much room to do sub-districts or other calibration based upon location exactly. So they were, in this study, talking about potentially in some locations increasing that height. And we have tested that idea and are drawing back from it because of the reaction that we've gotten. They talked about reducing or eliminating parking requirements. So we are, again, drawing back somewhat from those recommendations. And I think, as some of the comments have alluded to in the previous conversation just a moment ago, I feel like we are being as flexible as possible to try to get a meaningful set of zoning changes that could possibly be approved at town meeting, while also being very conscious of, as was suggested, providing a package which is not meaningful because it's not going to change toward a more viable pathway for future redevelopment. I think that the types of changes that we are talking about are meaningful, but the more we're trying to be accommodating and listen. I feel like we've throughout this process brought forward what I think is some very compelling and interesting data points to help support the recommendations we're making. And it's always pointed out to us that there's some sort of fundamental flaw or issue with the data that we brought forward. So we're trying to listen to that feedback and be responsive, but also trying to hold on to those fundamental recommendations that will make sense for the town in the future, East Milton Square. And then also allowing mixed use by site plan review, that last bullet, which is, I think, one of our fundamental and key points here. And that is a difference that's of some significance to move from special permit or a special approval process through the ZBA to a site plan approval. That's quite significant. So to help fortify the zoning language recommendations, which are sometimes more difficult to decipher and to see the justification behind, we talked with Tim and think it's a great idea to prepare a companion memo that would cover many of the same points or information or diagrams and data that we brought forward throughout this process, but put it together in a summarized format that is organized in the same way that the zoning bylaw, the proposed zoning bylaw, is organized, so that accompanying support and justification is there for the types of things that we're proposing. And it will also point to possible future changes which are not being proposed in the zoning, but that could be considered if the town would like to further open that pathway for viability in the future, if the context or feeling about that changes in the community. And so that, just wanted to let you all know that is in the works, and we'll provide with the next round of zoning language. And maybe I'll just go ahead and cover this next part, and then you all can jump back into discussion. But in terms of design guidelines, there were important design principles which we have integrated both into the standards and are integrated into the basic thinking on the design guidelines portion of the document. From the looking forward process, it's really about maintaining and enhancing the diversity and flexibility of uses. That's really a strong focus on the ground floor of these structures. Filling gaps in terms of the street frontage and the street wall, and making sure that the urban design of those new investments is appropriate and correct to have that lively sidewalk activity. We're doing a little bit less, because we're landing at 3 stories, a little bit less in terms of shaping the building massing. We want the benefit of that 3 stories, as however developers would like to work with that, but are thinking about how buildings relate to the streets, the corners, the intersections. Shared parking, we have some guidance around that and how that can work. And then ways that each project can contribute to streetscape and pocket parks. And this is consistent with what we've heard from the community, that they would like to see a combination of design guidelines and standards. We have, again, standards which are proposed in the language with the zoning, and then also the design guidelines are comprehensive and following a model of that which was established by the Milton Village design guidelines. And so you see, in terms of design standards, these are what are included in the proposed zoning language now already. A focus on context sensitivity, those sidewalk extensions, a village scale, ground floor activity, and then vehicular access and parking, and how that can work in a multi-purpose fashion. And then the design guidelines, following on the Milton Village example, we're working up a introductory section which lays out kind of how this is applicable, what its intent is, its organization, very similar to the Milton Village front end and preamble. We are also working on a historical context for East Milton Square, similar to what was put together for Milton Village, that highlights the post office structure, other structures which are contributing to the character and look and feel of the district, and then some cross-cutting design principles that relate back to the zoning language and those standards I mentioned. And then the design guidelines themselves are comprehensive, as the community suggested they should be, but also this is the outline which was followed in Milton Village. So we're following that outline. We are, there is some language that can be used consistently between Milton Village and East Milton Square, and where that's appropriate, we will do so. And in some places, it's not as appropriate to do so, and there will be more design guidelines which are more catered to East Milton Square. So that's a high-level summary, just to give you all a feel for that last component, how that's coming together as we're working it up, and wanted to offer that as a conversation starter, see if there's any other insights or input you would like to communicate to us as we put that together. Thank you.
That's great. And without getting into, there was a draft of the zoning that was sent out. I don't know if anybody, we won't get into that all this evening, but did anybody have any questions on that or comments? I mean, as we move forward, we'll be adjusting that. But.
Yeah, Josh said he has an update for us. So maybe we should wait for that update to offer more specific comments. But I did want to talk a little bit, Josh, or ask a question. Did you, the standards that are in the Milton Village, did you think that those level of standards would be the same that would be applied here? I mean, there was a fairly high amount of standards because we didn't have guidelines then. And those obviously are enforceable versus guidelines, which are kind of advisory. So I think it would be important for us to kind of settle on what we think really should be standards. Maybe first priority, because that's in the zoning, right?
Tim, I I don't know if you saw, would you be able to send out just what the Milton Village zoning looks like to the board for those who weren't on the board at the time when those were being created? That would just help to refresh people and make sure that
Yes.
they have
I
all
can
the
do that.
language of the standards. Because that'll be helpful to see where we're going with this. It was a great process, and I think there are some really good standards, which would be great to keep. So that would be good.
So Josh, in the standards that, in this draft, did you pull from the Milton Village? I didn't go do a cross comparison between the two.
Yes, we've borrowed quite liberally from East Milton, the Milton Village design standard, which were in the zoning language. So those show up as well here in Milton Square.
That's
Great.
Because I hadn't
Yeah.
cross-referenced it either.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I thought that draft was really good. One of the questions I had, and I'm just, I just put a note to myself on this. One of the things that we look at is, with some of the projects in East Milton, is how to take the utilities underground. And I don't know if you are familiar with language that you've done in other towns where I know it's not always possible, that has to work with Eversource and the town on this. But I think as much as best we can encourage new developments to do some nice street lighting and to bury the power lines would be great. Because it really is, I know 440 Granite is working to do that, and it really would help to improve the areas that that they have not been buried currently.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I'll think on it some more, but my initial reaction is that probably wants to land in the guidelines as opposed to the standards,
Right.
because it's so situational.
Yeah. That was another comment I had.
A question.
Yeah.
Was there any consideration given to designating specific historic properties versus the year 1940? Just thinking that there could be the potential for having properties that might not be the look and feel of East Milton or where we want East Milton to be?
There is language in the zoning saying that if it is not, if we don't feel like that it's, appropriate that be preserved, that's the discretion of the planning board.
We were pretty careful about the date as well, and did look at buildings relative to that date, and chose it to get, I think, to have it capture, I think, the properties that have been considered as historically significant in the conversations we've heard.
I think, and I have to double check here, but I believe in Milton Village, we did give opportunity to waive a specific standard if the board felt that would, and I think that's still a good idea.
And I think it's in there.
Okay, yeah. And same on the historic, because, if a building is not in good shape either, you don't want to make something burdensome if it's not even historic value.
Yeah, and that was, I did look for that,
Yeah,
and that is
okay,
in there. 'Cause
okay.
We do find that too. Case sometimes. All right, great. Anything else from any other members?
I would just say that, if MPIC members are interested, that the draft, the revised draft that we haven't yet received, that can be circulated to members if you'd like to also review it. And, if we can discuss at an MPIC meeting, and provide any feedback back, to the planning board if you'd like to do that, given our experience with doing Milton Village. Okay?
This is great, though. Thank you for having us.
And
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
so I will ask for a motion to adjourn the Master Plan Implementation Committee.
Happy to make that motion.
Second.
Okay, and I do believe we still have Roxanne, so we'll have to do a roll call vote. So Elaine,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Tabor,
Yes.
Roxanne.
Roxanne was not there.
Okay, and Regina had to leave, she messaged me, and yes, for me as well. So thanks, MPIC members.
Thank you, thank you.
Enjoy your evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. We have two quick things.
Thanks, Josh.
We do have our, Tim, And I don't know what the board members think. Well, I guess we can go, we have 95 Dexter and then the discussion on the letter, which should be very quick items. So I guess we'll stay with this.
Meredith, if it's possible, and it's all your call. We do have JT Keller from UTIL here, who has a relatively brief presentation relative to.
That's what I was wondering, if we wanted to let him, go, because rather than keeping our consultants on. If that's okay with the other members, let's do that. That's great. Welcome, JT.
I just promoted him to panelist. He'll be here in a brief second.
Great.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, JT.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Excuse me. Hi, there's a little bit of lag, but hopefully the transmission is clear enough. So I wanted to check in and update you all with the calculations that were requested last time we connected. And so I can just run through those with you very briefly.
Great,
Get everybody on the same page.
So
let me share my.
Before you do, go forward, Tim, the util slides from the last meeting, I don't believe were circulated to the board after the meeting. Were they posted on the website, though, in the MBTA section?
Hold on a minute, I'm checking. Yeah, the June 27th presentation is up there on the MBTA Communities website.
Great, thank you.
This is essentially the same presentation with just kind of one, level of detail further in the calculation. And so if we can, let's see here, turn this on. So just to kind of refresh us on how this kind of conditional logic for categorizing different towns as either rapid transit or commuter rail goes. The current designation of Milton is rapid transit because, they've calculated 100 acres of developable land within half a mile of rapid transit stations. And so the reason I wanted to reiterate that is because this helps us answer a question we had last week about how those calculations are made, whether or not, what developable station area actually means, and if that includes, commuter rail station area when you are calculating a rapid transit station area community, if or if it is singular to the specific type of MBTA service, right? And so, just to run through this really quickly again, Milton falls into adjacent community because, if you were to hypothetically say that, it's not a transit station area, or there isn't a, transit station within Milton, and therefore it does not have 100 acres of developable station area, then you go and you consider whether or not it has 100 acres of commuter rail station area, and we've determined that is also no, which I'll go through in a second. And then, if that's a no, you check, the population density, and if it's, above a certain threshold, then you're an adjacent community, which, is where Milton would fall. And so, to that point, the the definition of a rapid transit community is what we've just reiterated. And so that from that definition, commuter rail stations are not considered when, determining whether or not you're a rapid transit station. It's kind of like the first step. You just look at whether or not you have transit station area in your town. And if you don't have enough, if you don't meet the 100 acres, then you start, looking at the possible commuter rail acreage that's within the town. And so that's what we're doing right now, right? That's what was requested. I kind of follow up on it and take all the way to the end.
Thank you.
Yeah. Was there a question? Sorry.
No, I just was saying thank you. Yes, this is what we were trying to get to.
Yes. So yeah, that's the answer to that first question there. And then, this is kind of where we'd taken it the other week up to kind of just the acreage that falls within the buffer in Milton, and it's 74, which is, still less than the 100-acre threshold. Also not the number that your GIS team had. So there, we kind of wanted to, you had requested we take it all the way through and include the full calculation, which requires you to, subtract all of the excluded land that is identified within this whole model. The MBTA or the Mass GIS provides all of this as kind of the rubric for following the model. And so these 3A guidelines, the compliance model identifies, 7 different types of land as excluded land. One being public rights of way, obviously, protected open space, all publicly owned land except for, portions of lots deemed developable, which is all included in the spatial data that Mass GIS provides in order to conduct these kind of calculations. Educational, institutional land, and then you have, all of the natural resources, rivers, et cetera, all water bodies, wetlands, and then what are deemed wellhead protection, surface water supply protection areas. And so all of that are layers that that Mass GIS provides, and you just layer on top and then subtract from that station area. And so that leaves you with 36.5 acres of excluded land, and then you subtract that from the 74 gross, and that leaves only 37.5 acres of developable land within the commuter rail station area. And so this right here, this shows kind of all the parcels that fall within that station area. These are all developable parcels. You'll see, like in the Fairmount station in the middle, this middle column map, there's like one parcel that is excluded, and that's probably because it's a school or something, I'm not sure, but based on the building footprint, it's some sort of institution, right? And so, yeah, these are all of the parcels that fall within the station area that would be developable. Again, it's far less than 100 acres. So, according to the 3A guidelines, you're not within, you wouldn't meet the hypothetical threshold for commuter rail.
Okay. All right. Thank you, JT.
Yeah.
Any questions from any of the members? Is there anyone from the public who has any questions? I know we had a gentleman earlier. Tim, are there any hands up on this?
Let me move my window. No hands.
I would just ask that this be posted on the website.
Yeah.
As the update.
Yeah, Tim, would you be able to make sure that this is posted?
Will do.
So does this mean we're realistically an adjacent community? We're not.
Yes, I think, right. So like if we were to take,
so
you're not a commuter rail. If you're not transit, you're not a commuter rail, right? Right. So if you go back to the flow chart, sorry.
Yeah, can you stay on that
Yeah.
what the requirements for adjacent are? So the minimum land area at 50 acres. In this category, is there also requirement for minimum sub-district area of 5 acres?
The contiguous.
Yeah, contiguous is 50.
Yeah.
Contiguous, right. So it still has those same requirements. But this, Tim had said to us a few meetings ago that now this can be any part of Milton, right? Because it's not tied to any rapid transit or commuter rail or anything. So this, as adjacent, it can be anywhere in Milton, right?
Right. So the adjacent community doesn't have any sort of contiguity requirements. I'm sorry, it doesn't have any sort of proximity to stationary requirements because it doesn't have station.
And it still allows you to have an average density of 15 units an acre, not, so some
yeah.
could be more and some could be less again?
Yeah, that's across the board.
Okay.
Yeah, for any MBTA community that's 15 acres averaged out across the districts.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question about rapid transit? So regarding rapid transit classification, if we have less than 400 developable stationary acres, does that put us into a different category?
It puts you into a different category for one thing. It doesn't put you into a different category in terms of whether or not you're MBTA, rapid transit, or commuter rail. It does have a impact on. Let me confirm here. It does have an impact on the portion of multifamily zoning district that must be within the station area. So
that doesn't get us much. Okay.
Right. So it's like exactly. So there's all you need is 100 acres to be classified as rapid transit, but there are towns with 101 acres and there are towns with 850 acres of land within that area. And so, right, so like if you were on the lower end, you'd just have a less proportion of that requirement that would need to be in that proximity zone. So that's the only difference, and it would take you down from 50% to 40%. That's the only difference there.
So, and I think last time you gave us a number, and I probably wrote it down, but I don't have it at my fingertips. It's 900 and some units of
981
zone.
or something?
980.
Yeah, and
yeah, so
I thought it was 984, but it's
it's about 984. Let me just take you back to that slide. 985. So yeah, your 2020 housing, it's based on your 2020 housing stock calculated by the 2020 census. So yeah, if you were adjacent community, that's 10% of your housing stock. So
then the other thing, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you guys are exactly right. 985.
So just for the board's thinking, 985 divided by 50 acres, the minimum would be 20 units an acre. So we probably are looking at more than 50 acres of district, right? As we start thinking about that.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Unless you're okay with, that level of density. Yeah.
Right.
Beats the hell out of 25%.
All right, that's terrific, JT. Thank you. That's really useful information just for our.
Great. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
I'm glad it was clear and
we really appreciate you,
so.
Doing
Of
that
course.
work. Okay.
Great.
All right. So, seeing that it's 25 till 10, I am thinking, rather than getting into all of our districts and maps tonight, we really will have next week to really focus on that. I almost rather put that to next week and then move to our other agenda items.
Makes sense.
Which should bring us to 10 o'clock.
Yeah, makes sense.
That sound good with everybody?
So are we comfortable focusing, if we're moving forward, should we agree, or we're focused on creating a plan in line with being designated as an adjacent community?
I thought we had already agreed to do two
both.
paths.
Yeah.
Okay, so should there, one that we should focus on first, or?
So in my mind, it's easier to think about how to modify the 25% plan because it's already sort of what we've been thinking about for so long. And the 10%, since it's not tied to any location, it's like a lot more different to me. So it seems to me, once we run through the districts, what would we change to meet the 25? And then the next conversation is, would we still keep these districts in a 10%?
That's what I was thinking. There might be some overlap where
Yeah.
we do have higher density and, some of the.
That would be my suggestion.
But we plan to have multiple, so that's great. All right, thank you, JT. And then please say goodbye unless he's still there. So then we can move on to our old business. Tim, if you want to sort of tee this up, the 95 Dexter Street that we've.
Certainly. So we heard from the folks at 95 Dexter Street. They have a lot that fronts on Dexter and Blue Hill Ave. It is a 12,000 square foot plus or minus lot. There is a provision in our zoning that allows for that lot to be split into two 6,000 square foot lots in the C zone. They've done that. They provided a survey that showed that. The survey just happened to be missing some notations that we typically see on A&R plans, which I was able to get in touch with the surveyor from Neponset Valley Survey, and he was able to add those notations. I'll just share my screen real quick, just so you can see them. We've got the signature block, which, if and when you choose to endorse this plan, I'd ask that you just, empower me to sign on your behalf. And then the two notations, no determination of wetlands has been made or intended by planning board endorsement, and planning board endorsement does not reflect compliance with applicable zoning requirements. One of the requirements of your ability to endorse a plan is not requiring subdivision approval is that the frontage meets the zoning requirements, which it does under the provision of our zoning that allows this type of lot split. You need 60 feet of frontage, which both of these lots do. All of the rest of the zoning requirements relative to wherever the existing dwelling is, wherever a new proposed dwelling is, those will have to comply, irrespective of whatever the planning board says here. You're strictly looking at this from, is there access to a way? Is the frontage adequate? Can you get to, the buildable area of the lot from the frontage, which, given given some of the hoops that we've jumped through on Brush Hill Road and Hemingway Drive, this one's like slipping into a warm bath, with a nice square set of lots with straight lines on Blue Hill Ave and Dexter Street. So, and it's my opinion that this plan meets the standards for an A&R, and if the planning board would choose to endorse it that way, you'd be well within your rights to do that.
No, I thought we already voted to endorse it and that we just were looking at the final plan. Is that right?
We just needed to see the final plan because it needed to be, there were certain things that were required that were not on this plan that the engineer had to come back and add.
Okay, yeah, he did. So
those items have been fulfilled.
Yeah, signature block, these
block.
two notations, and then again, one thing that I noticed, later on was just making sure that the two lots are very clearly labeled, Lot A and Lot B, so that when you look at it, that this is a lot split. So that's all there, and I think we should be good to go.
Yeah, and the only other question I think we had, but I don't think it really matters, it's just out of curiosity, or what are those dotted lines?
Mm-hmm.
What does that represent?
And I appreciate, Jim had emailed about this. I appreciate him reminding me of that. This is actually, if you go on our GIS, you can look up some of the really old roll plans from, I think they go back to even the turn of the century. The subdivision around Dexter Street is actually these really, really tiny lots. And so what those dashed lines are actually showing you is this property is composed of actually 6 lots in common ownership.
Gosh. Wow.
And so those 6 lots have kind of gone, through the generations of ownership, together. They're all sold together. But those lines are there just so that if you are looking at this plan relative to the deed, that, when the deed says, these 6 lots, you can kind of see what they are. They're not labeled. They're not, they're not kind of reflective of anything. They're dashed because they're just kind of meant to be just kind of indicative of something, just so that if you're reading the deed, it makes sense. We treat lots in common ownership as one lot. And so that's why, you've got this kind of lot A, 6,000 square feet plus or minus, because they're all being transferred in common.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So then I guess the vote that we need to take is that this be the plan that we authorize Tim to endorse or to sign on our behalf, right?
Yeah, plan dated July 16, 2024.
Yeah.
The plan that we approve and authorize him, yeah.
So Jim, you ready to make that motion?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to approve the A&R at 95 Dexter Street based on the revised plan dated July 16, 2024, with our planning director to sign on our behalf.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we'll do a roll call. Cheryl?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Maggie?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Great. Thank you. And thank you for taking care of this, signing off on
Yeah,
that.
thanks, Tim.
Okay, great. And then the next discussion of the letter to the Milton Marketplace regarding site plan amendment for a second floor enclosure. I looked it over. I thought it was a great letter. Tim, you did a good job drafting that.
Excellent. Excellent.
Agreed.
And I would just ask for a motion that we authorize Tim to sign. Tim, would you like me to sign that because it was?
Yeah, it'd be good if you could come in and sign it.
I can come in and sign it. Yeah, I'll just drop in the office and sign that. So
I'll make a motion to authorize, I guess, Meredith to sign on behalf of the board the draft letter to the Law Office of Michael Modestino regarding Milton Marketplace on behalf of the board.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call on this. Sean, any discussion? Okay. Sean?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Maggie?
Yes.
Cheryl?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
Tim, for drafting that.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you very much, Tim. All right, and with that, we have completed our agenda for this evening. So if there's anything else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second. All right, roll call. Jim?
Yes.
Cheryl?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Maggie?
Yes.
And myself, yes.
Thanks, everyone. Good
evening.
night.
Thank you.
Thank you.